come into court every day with paper in their hands and a story on their lips. Usually the paper is a ticket, a complaint, a summons, or some other official reminder that actions have consequences. Usually the story is designed to make those consequences disappear. I have heard them all. The dog ate the registration. The cousin borrowed the car. The sign was too small. The officer was rude. The meter was unfair. The world, according to half the people who appear in court, is forever conspiring against them while they remain completely innocent. That is not new. What is rare is the case where the law lands on someone who is not making excuses, not shifting blame, not trying to manipulate the room, but simply trying to survive one unbearable day at a time. That was the kind of case I saw on a bitter morning when a widow walked into court carrying a parking citation she should never have been forced to defend. I knew before she even reached the podium that this was not the usual routine. Courtrooms have a rhythm. People either come in ready for a fight, ready to perform, ready to charm, or ready to deny the obvious. This woman looked like she had no energy left for any of that. She was dressed neatly, but the neatness had the feeling of effort without strength. The sort of effort people make when grief has already taken the best part of them and all they have left is habit. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen, her shoulders heavy. She was holding the citation as if it weighed 50 pounds. Now let me make something clear. A courtroom is not a tissue box with a flag behind it. It is not a place where every sad story wipes away every rule. Sympathy is not a defense. Tears are not evidence. If you break a rule, there is generally a consequence. That is what keeps a society orderly. But law without judgment is not justice. It is bureaucracy. And if you are going to put a human being in a black robe and give that person authority, then you expect something more than a mechanical recitation of rules. You expect intelligence. You expect proportion. You expect common sense. Her name was called, and she walked forward carefully. When I asked what happened, she answered in the voice people use when they are afraid that speaking plainly will make them cry. She told me that the day before, she had buried her husband. They had been married for 32 years. He had died after a short battle with cancer. There is no good cancer, and there is certainly no good way to watch someone you love disappear in front of you. She said the funeral had taken place the previous afternoon. Family came, neighbors came, children and grandchildren came, flowers came, food came, sympathy came. Then, by evening, everybody went home, which is usually the cruelest part of grief. The rituals end, the chairs are folded, and the person who has lost the most is left alone with the silence. She said she tried to sit in the house, but every room felt impossible. His glasses were still where he had left them. His robe was hanging behind the bedroom door. His favorite mug was on the kitchen counter. Every object had become a witness. She could not sleep. She could not breathe. So at around 2 in the morning, she got into her car and drove. She drove past the places that had mattered in their life together. The restaurant where he proposed, the hospital where their children were born, the park where they used to walk. Then she drove to the cemetery. She parked near the gate because it was as close as she could get. The place was closed, but she could see the fresh ground where they had buried him. She sat there in the dark and talked to her husband because grief does not care whether a conversation makes sense to anyone else. Sometimes talking to the person you lost is the only way to feel that love has not been erased by paperwork, flowers, and dirt. She stayed there longer than she realized. Dawn came. A parking enforcement officer saw the car and wrote her a citation because the area near the gate was restricted. That, according to the ticket, was the offense. Now, I'm not saying signs do not matter. I am not saying rules vanish because someone is sad. I am saying that when the state gives a person authority, even authority as small as writing a parking ticket, it expects that authority to be used with a brain attached. If you see a woman sitting quietly outside a cemetery at sunrise, not blocking traffic, not causing danger, not creating a disturbance, maybe this is the moment to act like a human being instead of a stapler with legs. Rules exist to serve order and safety. They do not exist to punish heartbreak. I asked her how much the citation was. $75. That amount may not sound catastrophic, and in many cases it is not. But context matters. A $75 ticket feels very different when it lands on top of medical bills, funeral expenses, exhaustion, and the first morning of widowhood. In that moment, it was not just a fine. It was one more official message from the world telling her that even grief must stand in line and pay. I asked a few simple questions. Was she parked there in defiance of prior warnings? No. Was her vehicle creating a hazard? No. Had she argued with the officer? No. Had she intended to ignore the rule? No. She had not even noticed the rule. She was not there because it was convenient. She was there because the life she knew had ended 12 hours earlier, and she was trying to figure out how to exist in the next hour. That matters. Too many people confuse strictness with wisdom. They think saying, rules are rules, is proof of principle. It is not. It is proof that they have stopped thinking. A child can repeat a rule. An adult in authority is supposed to know when applying the rule serves its purpose and when it simply adds cruelty to chaos. Parking enforcement is about order, safety, and access. It is not about punishing a widow for sitting near her husband's grave in the dark. So I told her exactly what I thought. I said, you were not joyriding. You were not shopping. You were not meeting friends for breakfast. You were sitting outside a cemetery after burying your husband. That is not misconduct. That is grief. You could see the change in her face immediately. It was not relief that she had won something. It was relief that somebody in authority had finally described the truth instead of hiding behind procedure. Then I dismissed the citation completely, not reduced, not delayed, not converted into some ridiculous payment schedule that would require her to spend the next 3 months mailing checks while trying to learn how to sign documents without crying. Dismissed because that was the only sensible outcome. Now, people love to ask a question at moments like this. They say, if you dismiss this, where does it stop? It stops where judgment stops. That is the answer. Courts are not vending machines. You do not insert tears and receive mercy. This was not a performance. This was not manipulation. This was a specific set of facts that any rational adult could evaluate. No danger, no intent, no disrespect, no pattern, just grief. The law provides discretion because life refuses to arrive in identical packages. Without discretion, a courtroom becomes an assembly line. And when justice becomes an assembly line, ordinary people stop trusting it. They begin to think the system has no eyes, no ears, and no pulse. Respect for the law depends in part on the belief that somebody, somewhere in the process, is still capable of seeing reality. The woman began to cry after I dismissed the ticket, not theatrically, not loudly, not to make a point. She cried the way exhausted people cry when they have spent hours bracing for one more blow and finally realize it is not coming. She said, "Thank you for seeing me as a person." That sentence stayed with me because that is really what many people lose when they enter a legal system while struggling. They lose personhood first. They become a case number, a fee, a form, a hearing date, an obligation. The law has to be structured, but it does not have to be blind to humanity. There is an enormous difference between orderly procedure and cold indifference. One builds trust, the other corrodes it. I thought afterward about the officer who wrote the citation. I am not interested in demonizing every public employee who makes a poor judgment call, but I am interested in standards. A person who carries authority, whether that authority is large or small, represents the state to the citizen standing in front of them. A police officer, a clerk, a code inspector, a judge, a parking officer. All of them shape whether the public experiences government as fair or as foolish. If ordinary people experience only rigid indifference, they stop believing that fairness exists. And once that belief collapses, everything becomes harder. Public service is not supposed to be a contest to see who can be the most inflexible. It is supposed to be the careful use of limited power, not arbitrary, not sentimental, careful. That requires thought, and thought requires courage because it is easier to point at a rule than to take responsibility for applying it wisely. The case also reminded me of something people forget until grief visits their own house. Grief does not simply make you sad. It makes you disoriented. It steals memory. It ruins concentration. It turns ordinary errands into impossible tasks. You forget appointments. You stare at forms and cannot understand a line. You walk into rooms and do not know why. The world still expects competence while the floor is falling out beneath you. Some people manage that well. Others do not. Both deserve room to remain human. That is why I have never believed that humiliation has any place in justice. Firmness has a place. Accountability has a place. Consequences absolutely have a place. Humiliation does not. A court should correct behavior when correction is needed. It should not take satisfaction in making wounded people feel smaller. People comply more willingly with institutions they believe are fair. Fairness includes mercy when mercy is warranted, not endless excuses, not emotional blackmail, warranted mercy. There is a difference, and adults should know it. What impressed me most was that she had shown up at all. Think about that. A woman who had buried her husband the day before still got dressed, drove to court, waited for her case to be called, and stood at the podium trying to explain herself calmly. That is strength, though not the kind people usually celebrate. Strength is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a widow standing upright in public when every part of her wants to disappear. There is another lesson in that. You do not know what the person in front of you is carrying, the cashier, the receptionist, the driver beside you in traffic, the person who seems distracted, the stranger who looks one sentence away from tears. You do not know. Decency does not require you to abandon standards. It requires you to enforce standards without stripping people of dignity. Huge difference. If someone is reckless, dishonest, dangerous, or selfish, hold them accountable. I do it every day. But if someone is broken by circumstance and harming no one, do not confuse punishment with principle. Too much modern life runs on that confusion. People hide behind policy because policy means they do not have to think. Thinking takes effort. Humanity takes confidence. It is easier to say no. It is harder and better to ask whether no serves any useful purpose. After she left, I found myself thinking less about the ticket and more about what the case represented. It was not really about parking. It was about whether institutions still possess enough common sense to recognize vulnerability when they see it. It was about whether somebody with even a small amount of power can distinguish between violation and suffering. And it was about whether the legal system can still produce an outcome that ordinary people recognize as fair. The answer that morning was yes, because justice is not measured by how harshly it can act. It is measured by whether it can act wisely. Wisdom that day required only one thing: look at the facts, tell the truth, and let the woman go home. Now let me tell you the part that matters most. Dismissing the citation did not bring her husband back. It did not erase the funeral. It did not cure the loneliness waiting for her at home. But it removed one unnecessary burden. Sometimes that is the most decent thing the law can do. Not save a life, not fix a tragedy, just refuse to add weight for no good reason. That is what justice should look like when common sense is still alive. Not softness, not favoritism, not bending rules for the powerful. Quite the opposite. It is the courage to apply law with intelligence instead of laziness. It is the refusal to turn bureaucracy into cruelty. It is understanding that fairness does not mean treating every situation identically. Fairness means listening carefully, seeing clearly, and deciding honestly. People often say they want the law applied equally. Fine. So do I. But equal treatment does not mean blind sameness. It means each person gets a fair hearing and an adult evaluation of the facts in front of them. Two people can receive different outcomes for the same technical violation because the surrounding circumstances are different. That is not bias. That is judgment. And if the legal system ever loses the courage to exercise judgment, it may keep its forms and procedures, but it will lose the one thing that makes justice worthy of respect: wisdom. So yes, I dismissed the ticket. I would do it again tomorrow, because the point of authority is not to prove that rules exist. The point is to use those rules in service of justice. On that morning, justice did not require punishment. It required a little intelligence, a little restraint, and a lot more humanity than the ticket writer had shown. That widow had already paid enough. The law had no business asking for another $75 from a woman sitting outside a cemetery trying to figure out how to live through sunrise. I also want to say something about titles, because people are hypnotized by titles. They hear judge, doctor, senator, officer, director, supervisor, and they assume the title itself is character. It is not. A title is a function. Character is how you treat the person who cannot benefit you. That is the real test. Anybody can be charming with donors, polite with cameras, respectful to a boss, and generous in public. Show me how you behave when dealing with the janitor, the widow, the cashier, the clerk, the frightened person who has no leverage over your day. That is where morality lives. In ordinary encounters, in small decisions, in the 5 seconds where you can choose dignity or contempt. That is one reason this case bothered me as much as it did. The ticket was small, but the message inside it was large. The message was, your pain is irrelevant. Procedure matters more. That is a dangerous message for institutions to send. People can survive tragedy better than they can survive meaninglessness. If the law responds to suffering with mindless formality, then the law starts looking less like justice and more like insult. And there is one more thing. Some people hear mercy and immediately panic. They imagine chaos. They imagine favoritism. They imagine standards collapsing into mush. Nonsense. Mercy is not the absence of standards. Mercy is the intelligent application of standards by someone mature enough to recognize context. It takes far more discipline to use discretion well than it does to hide behind a policy and call yourself principled. Real maturity requires the ability to say, this is technically a violation, but punishment here serves no useful public purpose. That sentence is not weakness, it is wisdom. A civilized legal system must leave room for that kind of wisdom, or it becomes ridiculous. And when it becomes ridiculous, it becomes resented. Citizens are much more likely to respect courts, officers, and laws when they believe somebody in the chain can still think like a grown-up. That is why this mattered. Not because $75 would bankrupt her, not because the case was dramatic. It mattered because every person in that courtroom and everybody who hears the story later understands the difference between enforcement and cruelty. They know it instinctively. Common sense may be uncommon, but it is not extinct. So when I say the right result was dismissal, I do not mean a sentimental result. I mean a rational one. The law should punish carelessness when carelessness matters, recklessness when recklessness causes risk, selfishness when selfishness harms others. But this was none of those things. This was sorrow parked briefly in the wrong place. And if the justice system cannot tell the difference between a scofflaw and a grieving widow at dawn, then the problem is not with the widow. The problem is with the system. That morning, at least, the system got it right. And that is exactly why judges are supposed to think.
A senator's wife enters the courtroom with an air of superiority, convinced that her social status places her above everyone else. The case seems routine at first, but things take a dramatic turn when testimony reveals how she publicly humiliated a hardworking school janitor during a heated confrontation. Witnesses describe how the janitor, known for his kindness and dedication to local students, was simply doing his job when the senator's wife began insulting him in front of teachers, parents, and children. Instead of showing respect, she mocked his position and treated him as if he were beneath her. As the hearing continues, she shows little remorse. She dismisses the janitor's feelings, claims the incident was being exaggerated, and repeatedly reminds everyone of her husband's political influence. The courtroom grows silent as the judge carefully reviews the evidence and listens to witness accounts. What emerges is a story not about status or politics, but about basic human dignity and respect. Then comes the moment nobody expected. The judge delivers a powerful response, reminding the courtroom that a person's worth is not measured by wealth, titles, or connections. The janitor, who spent years helping students and keeping the school running, deserved the same respect as anyone else. As the ruling is announced, the senator's wife sits speechless. The courtroom is left stunned by the judge's chilling words, which serve as a reminder that character matters far more than social status. By the end of the hearing, the janitor walks away with his dignity restored, while the senator's wife learns a lesson she will never forget: respect must be given to everyone, regardless of their position in life.